No, sir. Other than I'm glad to finally be given the opportunity to plead guilty. I am happy to be pleading guilty to these charges for a number of reasons.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Honor,
Yes, sir.
I am guilty, and yes, sir, I believe that I would be found guilty.
we would also withdraw our motion for recusal, so we can proceed with you being the judge on this matter.
At this point, how do you plead?
I plead guilty, Your Honor.
All right.
I've been digesting this hearing for a few days now, and there are some things that just don't sit right with me. You all know I'm not a fan of Dick and Jim and their twisty little tricks, so naturally, it's hard for me to take this at face value without feeling like there's something dastardly in the works yet to be revealed. Alex pled guilty to all financial charges against him last week, just days after filing a motion to transfer venue and another one demanding Judge Newman recuse himself, not just from the murder stuff, but from all things Murdaugh. So this sudden change of heart out of absolutely nowhere is very suspicious indeed. I keep asking myself, what are they up to? I guess we'll have to wait and see. But for now, we're going to break down this plea hearing. We're going to focus on what counts he pled guilty to, the Alford plea on the indictment from his own brother Randy Murdaugh, and like it says in the title, what's with all these smirks? Are you ready? Let's get started. This is part 1 of the deep dive into Alex Murdaugh's plea hearing. Why is Alex smirking? Welcome. Our first shot came when Alex himself walked in. This was just supposed to be a hearing about some of the motions that had been filed, so it's not the sort of thing we were expecting to see them transport him from prison. Next, seeing everyone so smiley and chatty with each other was another big difference from the usual atmosphere of these hearings. Then, Creighton Waters blew us away, saying they were there to discuss a plea, and right then and there I knew the rest of my day needed to be rescheduled.
Court is back in session. Thank you. You may be seated.
Mr. Waters?
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Afternoon.
We're obviously here in the state grand jury case against Richard Alex Murdaugh. He is president and represented by his counsel, Dick Arfootlian and Jim Griffin. As Your Honor is aware, we currently have trial scheduled to begin a week from Monday on at least one aspect of the multiple financial crimes that have been investigated and indicted by the state grand jury against Mr. Murdaugh for his abuse of his law license to steal money from clients. It is my understanding that Mr. Murdaugh here today intends to plead guilty pursuant to a plea agreement, which I will detail here in a moment, and that this will ultimately, if this proceeding goes through, will resolve those financial crimes that are alleged against Mr. Murdaugh. Your Honor,
Did you see that face? He does not like Creighton saying what he did. And this is the first huge red flag, because if he were really here contrite, remorseful, and pleading guilty for the right reasons, he would look a bit different here in my opinion. I mean, at least Corey Fleming put on a pretty good show of remorse when he was in this seat. Alex, on the other hand, looks smug and proud as ever, not even attempting to look like he feels the slightest bit bad about what he's done to these people. We're about to see a couple of things here in this next clip. One, we're going to see Judge Newman following the rules so well. Obviously, defense has agreed to this plea, yet he makes sure to have them speak on the record so that all is done by the book. Then we see Creighton's kind consideration for Team Alex, asking that they be able to sit while he addresses the court, even though he himself will be standing throughout. I just like to mention things like this that we can observe that show a person's character.
Plea agreement, I believe you have a copy up at the bench. Is that correct, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Pursuant to that plea agreement, Your Honor, and I'll detail the plea agreement and the various provisions of it as we do this particular.
Is all that correct thus far, Mr. Harpootlian?
Yes, sir, Your Honor, it is.
All right. Go ahead, please.
And Your Honor, I would ask if the defendant could be sworn as we begin this proceeding, and obviously I think because it'd be fairly lengthy, I would request that they be allowed to sit during the state's presentation.
All right. Mr. Murdoch, you'll stand.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And in this next clip, we're about to see the second smirk, which he's going to sit there and hold for a long time. Don't you just wonder what's behind it?
We have, in fact, signed a plea agreement here with the defense here today. It has been executed by me for the state, as well as Mr. Harpootlian and Mr. Murdoch himself. And you should have a number of sentencing sheets that are part of this plea. What we've endeavored to do with this plea is to bring some finality to this matter, but to also ensure that there's an appropriate sentence, a lengthy sentence that ensures that Mr. Murdoch will remain in state prison for a very long time. Your Honor, there are a lot of charges, and so I'm going to first of all go through and detail the charges from the various indictments to which he will be pleading. And again, to put this plea together, we ensured that there was at least one, and sometimes more than one, representative charge for each victim that was victimized by Mr. Murdoch in the course of his legal practice.
So what he means here is for each indictment that Alex has against him, there are multiple charges because each offense had multiple facets to it, including things like fraud, computer crime, money laundering, breach of trust, and so forth. Each one of these charges comes with its own sentence. His victims range anywhere from 4 charges to 30, depending on how many schemes were involved in each theft. As per this plea agreement, they choose 1 or in some cases up to 4 of these charges for each victim. This method reduces the amount of time for each indictment and ultimately for the entire sentence. The courts do this in plea agreements because they are saving the court time, money, and headache to plea rather than hold a trial, or in this case, multiple trials. So here's the part where Creighton starts to read out all of the indictments, all of the counts, all of the victims, and what he pleads to. He speaks really fast. It's kind of hard to catch just listening to it. So I made this little spreadsheet to make it a little bit easier to understand. So first we have the victim, the county, and the indictment number. Column B is how many counts are in that indictment. So for example, we see Thomas Moore. He's in Orangeburg. His indictment number is 2021 GS 4727, and there are 4 separate counts or charges in his indictment. And then they are breach of trust, over 10,000. Now these years I list, this is the maximum sentence possible for each of them. And rarely does someone serve the maximum. So count number 1 was breach of trust for over $10,000 with the possibility of up to 10 years. His second count was money laundering of over $100,000. That has a maximum of 20 years. His third count was computer crime, 5 years. Fourth count, forgery, 10 years. So of these, his possible max sentence would be 45 years. No one serves all of that. His plea deal will be in the actual column. So in this plea deal, for Thomas Moore, he had a possible 45-year sentence, but he pled to a 20-year sentence. So that's how you understand this spreadsheet. So next we go to Chris Wilson, and in this case, he pleads to 2 counts. Count 1 and count 7. They're both signature by false pretenses. And for this one, the negotiated sentence, for most of them, even if he pleads to more than 1, they have 1 set sentence for all of them. But in this one, they're stacked, so 10 plus 10. So he's pleading for 20. Dion Martin is next. He has 4 counts. Alex pleads to count 1, which is breach of trust of over $10,000, with a 10-year sentence, so instead of 35 years, it's 10 total. Then we move down to the most well-known case, Gloria Satterfield. This one is by far the biggest. It has 30 counts in it. So if you were to take the max sentence of all of these, and yes, I looked these all up individually to come up with the spreadsheet, the max sentence would be 330. He pleads to counts 4, 5, and 8, and this one is not stacked. This is a set amount of 20. That's a pretty good deal. Then we come to Manuel Santis Cristiani, 2 counts. He pleads to count 1, breach of trust, for 10 years. Randy Drawdy, he pleads to count 1, breach of trust for less than $10,000 with a 5-year plea deal. Blondell Gary, if you've watched my victim podcast, she's one of the ones I have covered already. She has 3 counts, and he pleads guilty to count number 2, which is money laundering in the excess of $100,000 for a plea deal of 20 years. Then we have Christopher Anderson with 3 counts. Alex pleads to count number 2, money laundering as well, 20 years. Jordan Jinks. Jordan Jinks was a friend of his since childhood. I believe he's the one that when they were kids playing, Alex broke his arm. But as things go with Alex, it doesn't matter if you're a friend or a childhood friend. He will take your money. And he did. And he got 5 counts for it, to which he pled to count number 5, forgery of $10,000 and up, with the sentence of 10 years. Johnny Bush, 2 counts. Alex pled to count number 2, computer crime, for a deal of 5 years. Jamie and Risher had 3 counts. Alex pled to count 1, breach of trust with fraudulent intent, for a 10-year deal. Then we have Sandra Taylor, also 3 counts. He pled to count number 2, money laundering over $100,000. Now this one is interesting. I don't know why this one and not the others, but this one, instead of the 20-year, he got 7, but what's interesting is that it's consecutive, not concurrent. So all of these others are going to run concurrently, which means he will serve the time at the same time. But this one is consecutive. So I'm sure by now you've heard the amount of years that he pleads to is 27. And this is where the 7 comes from. For some reason, he doesn't get 20 years for this one. He takes 7, but they are consecutive, and they're teamed up, of all things, with count 5 of the Satterfield plea deal. So I can't tell you why, unless that's just some random 20 year they tacked it onto, but this is where the 7 of the 27 comes from. This one is a consecutive sentence. We move on then to Natasha Thomas, and there are 6 counts here. He pleads to count 1 for a 10-year deal. And here's where I started to get irked. Hakeem Pinckney, you know this story. If you've listened to me for a while, you know that this is one of those nearest and dearest stories to my heart. His story is just too sad. So because this happened before Forge, there are certain charges or counts that can't be held against him. So for all of these others that happened after Forge, you see the high 20-year sentences for money laundering. But that didn't happen in this case. So Alex pleads to count 1, breach of trust with fraudulent intent, for a maximum of 10 years. And I can't even tell you how much I hate this. I was angry typing this portion of this spreadsheet because it just seems so unfair. And I know these are all going to run concurrently. So even if he had the 20-year sentence, it wouldn't really affect the total. But I just hate seeing this number is only 10 for what he did to Hakeem and Hakeem's family. This number's only 10, and I just hate it so much. And then scrolling down, the next one, also nearest and dearest to my heart, is the Arthur Badger story. If you haven't watched that, please go watch these 2 men's stories. These 2 are the ones that got me the most. But it's the same, because this is before Forge, so we don't get the big numbers. The highest number any of these counts can be is 10. So they socked it to them and gave them 16 counts, but the max is 10. And I just, next to these 2 guys' names, seeing these 10s, it irks me. But it makes me sad. I feel such a sense of injustice for them, that this is the weak number next to their names. But what you gonna do? Moving on. Now this is the part that really surprised me. I thought this was just going to be about the financial victims and the counts in their indictments, 101. But these got added to it, and then I was irked again. This, to me, in my humble opinion, this is too good of a deal for Alex. Now, the county charges, they did say those are going to come separate, but I can't believe that these next charges got added in with these financial victims. We see 2022 GS 4710 is the Alex and Cousin Eddie conspiracy. This includes the money laundering, the forgery, the conspiracy, the drugs. All of it rolls in together. It's 12 separate counts in this indictment. And look at the deal. He takes count number 1, 5 years. I don't know how this happened, why this happened. I assume the state, they're obviously okay with it. I'm not okay with it, but nobody asked me. 5 years for this, and it's added in. I feel like these should be separate. These should be dealt with. Alex got a great deal. When all is said and done, this is a super, super, super good deal for Alex, and I'm irked. Then we have one more financial victim. We have Randy Murdoch, his brother. Now, this is really interesting to me, and I do have another separate podcast in the works that's all of the people who claimed what's left of Alex's asset money. And Randy was in there, and I was so shocked when I saw that. He actually filed a claim against what's left of his brother's money. But he's here too in this indictment with 4 counts, and Alex pled for count number 3, money laundering of over $100,000. But the reason this is a different color is because this particular indictment falls, and only this one, falls under what's called an Alford plea. And I'm going to explain that when I finish this spreadsheet, what this Alford plea is. It's very, very odd. This one, only this one that's his brother, is an Alford plea. But yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that. So 20 years from Brother Randy. More than Hakeem got, more than Arthur Badger got. But there it is. Another interesting thing I noticed about Brother Randy, on the Fox Nation documentary that came out earlier this year, all of the pictures, I recognized them because I've seen these pictures a million times. I have them saved in my computer. All of the pictures that had Randy in them were blurred. He had his face blurred. Everyone else's face showed, but not Randy's. And I thought that was really, really interesting. But I think the last episode did show a picture with his face not blurred. But apparently they did not have Randy's permission to show his face in that documentary. So I do wonder what happened there. And I wonder where things stand, not just with him, but with John Marvin. Moving on, the next indictment is for Alex's former law firm, PMPED, which is now called Parker's. There are 5 counts in this indictment. He pled to number 3, signature by false pretenses, for 10 years. And finally, we come to tax evasion. Now this one is because he stole that money. Once he stole it, it was income and therefore taxable, even though it was not his, even though they were settlements. A lot of them, if they were medical settlements, they would be non-taxable to the appropriate person they were supposed to go to. But once Alex took them, it became income to him and he owed taxes on it, which is kind of weird when you think about it, to owe taxes on stolen money. But there are 9 counts, they're all the same, and it's 5 years. So there we have the totals. The possible maximum sentences, over 1,300 years. If you add up all of the years that he pled to together, it's 227, but they will run concurrently or run side by side. And the max of all of these was 20. So it would just be 20 years, but for that one Sandra Taylor, 7 years that had to go consecutively. So that gives him 27, to which he has to serve 85% of, which will be 22 years total. So at first, when I saw him smirking, I thought there's something up their sleeves that they're planning to do. And there still may be. But once I started looking into this and looking up all of the possible sentences and adding them, and then especially when I saw Cousin Eddie and the law firm and the tax evasion all rolled into this, I thought I'd be smiling too. If they had separated these trials into 3 and he had been convicted on all 3, it would have been life in prison, in addition to the 2 murder ones he already has. But he got all of this rolled together, including not just the victims, for a sweet deal of 22 years. That's why Alex is sitting there smirking. And it irks me, as I'm sure it does all of you too. What got me started in this, if you look at my first videos in the Alex Murdaugh series, was pity for his victims. I always wanted more people to know more about who his victims were and what was done to them. Because now it is really, really hard to find that information. Some of them, I couldn't even find a picture of them to put on their videos. And that's shameful. Everybody knows Alex's name, but most of us probably couldn't name all of these victims. The Satterfield's very well known, but everyone else, most people don't even know their names, let alone what happened to them. So seeing this just feels so unjust to me. So this particular podcast has been really hard for me to do, and I went overboard. I looked up every one of these counts to see the possible sentencing. Put this spreadsheet together to make you be able to understand and see a little bit better. Because it's really hard to concentrate when Creighton's just reading off all these numbers really fast. It goes by and it's like, what's he talking about? It's hard to pay attention even. So I wanted to put this in black and white so you could see exactly what this plea deal is. And I know this is the way the world works. He saved the court a vast amount of money, a vast amount of time to plea instead of holding all of these different trials. And so they do get rewarded for that. But it feels very unjust to me. Now let's talk about this Alford plea. The Alford plea comes from a case in North Carolina that started coincidentally on November 22nd, 1963, so 60 years ago today, and the same day that President Kennedy was shot. Keeping in mind that during Kennedy's presidency, civil rights were very hot, especially in the South. Most of the civil rights bills were started by Kennedy, but unable to be passed until after his death, when Johnson took them on and had them passed. Why is that important? Because Henry Alford was a black man with the prior conviction of armed robbery and murder. On that day in November, he had rented a room at a so-called party house with a white woman when he got into a fight with the owner, Nathaniel Young. This fight was witnessed by other people. They left, and later that evening, someone knocked at the door, and when Young answered, he was killed with a shotgun. This time, there were no witnesses, so Henry Alford became the prime suspect since he was last seen fighting with Young. To add to those facts, there were witnesses who came forward that said they saw Henry retrieve his shotgun, state that he was going to go kill Young, left, and returned saying that he indeed did kill Young. With those witnesses, together with his previous conviction, even his own lawyer believed he was guilty, though he always maintained that he was innocent. With little chance of escaping a death sentence in that climate and with these witnesses, Alford pled guilty to second-degree murder and got a sentence of 30 years. He then appealed his sentence, stating that he had been coerced into making the plea by the heavy threat of a death sentence hanging over him. The Supreme Court of North Carolina agreed with the lower court and said he knew what he was doing when he made the plea. Alford petitioned for a writ of habeas corpus in the United States District Court for the Middle District of North Carolina, which upheld the initial ruling, and so he then turned to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, which ruled that Alford's plea was not voluntary because it was made under fear of the death penalty, and they quoted him saying, "I just pleaded guilty because they said if I didn't, they would gas me for it." Ultimately, Alford's case went before the Supreme Court, where Supreme Court Justice Byron White wrote the decision and the Alford plea was born. In such a situation where the evidence is overwhelming and a conviction is pretty much a sure thing, you may take an Alford plea, not because of an admission to the crime, but because the prosecutor has sufficient evidence to place a charge and to obtain conviction in court. It's now used at every level court. If you followed the staircase case of Michael Peterson, who was convicted of killing his wife on the stairs of their home, you'll remember that he was able to give an Alford plea at his second trial because it was very likely he would again be found guilty and he didn't want to take the chance. He also still maintains his innocence in that crime. Once he took the Alford plea, he was released with time served. Henry Alford himself died in prison not long after, in 1975. So the plea that was named after him didn't really serve him, but has been put to use many times since it was written. So this is the plea that Alex applied to the indictment for stealing from his brother, Randy. An Alford plea. Isn't that odd? There's always something odd in every step of the way with this case, but this one is just inexplicable to me. Jeannie Seckinger testified about the situation that this indictment is for. During the murder trial, she explained that with the pay system at PMPED, all cases were closed out in December. Therefore, starting up the new year left them out of money to pay for expenses in the firm until more money could start coming in. Senior partners would loan money to the firm for the first few months, and the firm would pay them back as soon as they could, sometime in the spring. Alex, of course, was not known to ever loan the firm money, but Randy did. In May 2017, the firm was paying back those loans, but accidentally wrote out Randy Murdoch's payment to Alex Murdoch. Alex, ever the crook, instead of taking the check back and telling them that it was a mistake, he asked them to reissue the check, again to himself. What his intentions were by asking them to reissue the check, who knows? Maybe he was afraid it might later get caught by the bookkeepers, and if there was a new check it would be harder to trace. Who knows how Alex's mind works? But he cashed that check shortly thereafter and kept the money. Later in the fall, he took the original check, there had never been a stop payment put on it, and deposited that, and took that as well. This really makes me question that accounting system in that law firm. How did they not catch this? This check was over $100,000 and it was cashed twice. And I'm sure at some point Randy asked the firm for that money back, but no one seemed to notice. So this is, as I said, the situation that this indictment involving his brother Randy is for, and he took an Alford plea. But there's a money trail, and there's witnesses to this whole exchange. There's no doubt at all that Alex cashed those checks. So why the Alford plea? And of all the indictments, why this one? It's just another thing to add to the list of the never will be solved pile in this case.
The next one is 2022 GS 4723. This is venued in Hampton County, and the victim is Randy Murdoch and the law firm. He will be pleading to count 3, which is money laundering, value more than $100,000, and for a negotiated sentence of 20 years. Your Honor, I would add that that particular count, and only that particular count, the plea will be pursuant to Alford.
And that was the one time in all of the reading that Alex seemed to visibly blush and not be able to look in the direction of the camera.
Your Honor, obviously we are here today to resolve indictments that span the region and that span a number of counties. And this, of course, has materialized here today as we showed up for pretrial proceedings. And so obviously the proposal that we have for Your Honor is to take these pleas today with these negotiated sentences that result in a net lead sentence of 27 years at 85% time. We do request that we defer sentencing to a later time so that all the various victims can be notified. We have been in the process of notifying them, but obviously want that proceeding to take place at a time where they can be present and speak to the court if they wish to. So we do have that request to Your Honor. Additionally, as we look at this particular plea agreement, because we have crimes to which he is pleading in various counties, we would request that there be a colloquy with the defendant to waive venue for those counties other than Beaufort to resolve those matters here today with this plea.
We're going to have a quick vocabulary lesson here. There will not be a quiz this time. But he used a word that might not be super familiar to all of us, and that word is colloquy. It's a conversation between the judge and the defendant, but there's often speaking in a hearing, so what is special about a colloquy? It's a discussion during a hearing between the judge and the defendant, and here's the important part, usually to ascertain the defendant's understanding of his or her rights and of the court proceedings. The reason they make these stand out and be specific is because in a hearing like this, you don't want the defendant to be able to come back later or appeal and say, oh, well, I didn't fully understand what they were asking of me and I revoked my plea, or any such thing that could undo this plea. So it becomes a specific part of the record. There are written rules about how these things should be worded, and the defendant must answer out loud so his or her answers can become part of the record as well. They're going to use that word a few times today. As we can see, Creighton and Judge Newman are proceeding very carefully and very by the book. He also mentions a term, waive venue. Alex's indictments come from Allendale, Hampton, Orangeburg, Colleton, and Beaufort is where this hearing is being held. By waiving venue, it's him giving consent to hold this hearing in one place rather than separate them into all the different counties, which is how, if they were going to trial, it would have taken place, some in Colleton, some in Hampton, wherever those crimes took place. So this first colloquy is getting it on record that Alex is waiving venue, or consenting to hold his trials all in Beaufort, regardless of which county the crimes took place in.
In looking through the various provisions in the plea agreement, and we've gone over them in great detail with counsel, and I believe counsel has gone over them with his client. It sets forth the various pleas and the various counts to which he will be pleading that I just detailed, as well as the negotiated sentences. It also, though, has in this particular plea agreement that Mr. Murdoch will waive any appeals that he may have and any post-conviction relief appeal that he may have as it relates to the financial matters that we are addressing here today, thus bringing finality to this sentence and to this chapter in the history of the South Carolina judicial system.
Can we just look at that again? Dick has sat sleepily for most of this hearing, and Alex smirking from time to time, usually when Creighton says something he doesn't like drawing attention to the things that he did. But their body language changes a bit here when he says Alex won't be able to appeal this. Alex smirks again, and Dick gets fidgety. It just put the hairs on the back of my neck up. Made me think, do they have some evil plan up their sleeves? I'd love to hear what a body language expert thinks of them right here in this moment.
It also, though, has in this particular plea agreement that Mr. Murdoch will waive any appeals that he may have and any post-conviction relief appeal that he may have as it relates to the financial matters that we are addressing here today, thus bringing finality to this sentence and to this chapter in the history of the South Carolina judicial system.
Did you see that? Do you see what I mean?
Of course, though, we would request a colloquy with him about those particular waivers as well. In the event that Mr. Murdoch accepts these pleas and accepts this negotiated sentence of 27 years in state prison, then obviously the state will null pros the various remaining counts following consummation of the plea.
Now I know you saw that. You all are a smart bunch, and that was just too obvious. It's like those old cartoons where the bad guy looks straight at the camera rubbing his hands because he knows his evil plan is in place. Sinister, evil, malicious, whatever word you want to use. That was an exchange that needs deciphering.
And accepts this negotiated sentence of 27 years in state prison, then obviously the state will null pros the various remaining counts following consummation of the plea.
This time I'm not going to play it twice. Just watch this next section closely and tell me what you think. Am I seeing things, or is something happening here? You know what's going on right now in the federal court this is the part of the process between the plea and the sentencing, where Alex is supposed to be telling the court everything he knows. Alex may have something juicy enough to use as leverage. Even though they said in the paperwork that it won't help his sentence, nothing is ever really over in this case, and nothing would surprise me there. They were fighting tooth and nail to stop or postpone the state case, and now they're perfectly happy to sit there and take this? Whispering and smirking? If it's not the federal case, with all my being, I feel something is happening here. In fact, I felt it so hard, I just got a case of the hiccups and had to take a break from recording. But just watch this next segment for yourselves and tell me what you see.
Additionally, it's important to point out that this plea today does nothing to address any county charges. This is only here to address the state grand jury charges that have been indicted. It has no effect, obviously, on the murder convictions and the litigation that surrounds the murder convictions. This, again, is only here to resolve those financial matters, and that is the point of this particular proceeding, to take care of that. I think those are perhaps the major provisions that we need to address that are in.
Make sure and let me know what you think in comments. I clipped some of the next bit out, and we're going to get to the next colloquy, which is a formal part of this plea process where Alex officially enters his plea. We'll also hear Dick asking to withdraw their vicious little motion to get Judge Newman recused just days before this hearing took place. And we talked about this a few podcasts ago. He attached the irrelevant affidavit from his friend the law professor with the 10-page CV that absolutely no one cares about and does not put him in any position of authority to tell judges what they should or shouldn't do.
With that, Your Honor, I would yield to Your Honor to have the colloquy with Mr. Murdoch, and then I'll be happy to address the factual basis after that.
Mr. Harpootlian?
Your Honor, Mr. Murdaugh agrees with the state's rendition concerning the plea agreement. He has executed that plea agreement. We would also withdraw our motion for recusal so we can proceed with you being the judge on this matter. I think that's all I would say prior to you having the colloquy with Mr. Murdaugh. Jim?
Mr. Griffin, any comment at this point?
No, Your Honor, I have nothing further to add.
Mr. Murdaugh, you've heard what Mr. Waters has stated. Do you agree with the statements he has made?
Yes, sir.
And do you wish to withdraw your formally entered plea of not guilty and plead guilty to each and every one of these charges?
I do.
You, your lawyer, and the prosecutor have negotiated a sentence in this matter that's been recited by Mr. Waters. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And where there's a negotiated sentence, either I will accept the plea, guilty plea, and give you the exact sentence that you, your lawyer, and the prosecutor have negotiated, or I will not accept your guilty plea. Do you understand that?
I do, yes, sir.
And would you like for me to accept the guilty plea and impose the negotiated sentence?
Yes, sir, I would.
And because these cases, various counts are venued in various counties, Orangeburg County, Hampton County, Colleton County, Bamberg County, Allendale County, I think that in addition to Beaufort, do you wish to waive venue from those counties to have the case heard here in Beaufort?
I do.
Is there any question in your mind as to whether or not you wish to proceed with this guilty plea?
No, sir, there's no question in my mind.
Do you believe you've had enough time to think about it?
Yes, sir, I do.
Are
Had a
you
long
set?
time to think about it.
I can imagine. Do you believe that you've had effective representation by Mr. Harpootlian and Mr. Griffin?
Absolutely.
Now, this plea agreement includes a provision providing for a waiver of appeal and waiver of filing any post-conviction relief, as well as ordering restitution. You have reviewed those provisions and are fully informed and agree with those provisions?
I am, yes, sir.
Under the Victim's Bill of Rights, the court must ensure that the victim's Bill of Rights have been complied with. The state is well aware of that, as well as your lawyers. And the victims have the right to be heard prior to the official imposition of any sentence or the official acceptance of a guilty plea. Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
And so it's the intent of the court, assuming a factual basis is established by Mr. Waters or Mr. James, that the court will accept this guilty plea contingent upon the victim's Bill of Rights being satisfied. Therefore, any sentencing will take place at a subsequent hearing, which will be on November 28th at 10 o'clock.
This is a good place to stop for today. In part 2, we're going to focus on this Victim's Bill of Rights that Judge Newman just mentioned and what effect, if any, it can have on this plea deal. And I'm excited to get to that with you all. Until then, this is Cassidy O'Connell saying stay well and stay tuned.